Call this meeting to order. This is the regular school board meeting for Monday, March 26, 2012. And you have a couple items in the table file, I believe.
Yes, you've got the actual PowerPoint presentation for Bridgewater Elementary on their PLC, which they wanted you to have as part of their presentation tonight. And then you also have one additional personnel item that's a retirement.
Okay. Wonderful. We will add the Bridgewater item as we come to it in the items for discussion. We are now ready for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the school district to address the board. You are requested to do so from the podium. After being recognized by the chair, each individual can identify themselves and state the reason for addressing the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Okay.
Good evening. I am Heather Imes, the school social worker at the middle school. With me tonight is Kari Pressman, the social worker from the high school, Noreen Cooney, the social worker from Sibley, Melissa Larson, the social worker from Bridgewater, Jamie Wiebe, the long-term sub from Greenville Park Elementary, and Shelley Hansen from Longfellow. We are here tonight to express our concerns of the proposed cuts to the school social work positions in connection with the RTI. We hope you are able to read our letter sent by email. Briefly, we would like to recap our concerns. To remind you of our role in the district, to the work on behalf of students, family, and staff, we provide individual and group counseling, parent support, crisis support, behavioral interventions and implementation, and referrals to community services such as children's mental health, social services, child protection, mentoring programs, and much more. Currently, there are full-time social workers in all three elementaries and at the middle school. Additionally, there's a .8 at the high school and a .4 serving the early childhood students and families. There are currently no social work in the students from 0 to 3 in their families, and no one from the ALC. The current RTI proposal reduces social work by 0.95 FTE. This will leave full-time positions at each elementary intact, but cut the positions both at the high school and middle school to just half-time and then benefiting only special ed students. Additionally, the early childhood position would be cut to 0.25 FTEs, leaving just 5 days a month for the social work services with this vulnerable age group, and again, targeting only special ed students. And also, again, no one from 0 to 3 for the students or families or ALC. The necessity of RTI is clear. However, we strongly state that reducing social work services along the way will be detrimental to students' achievement. The various needs of students and their families here in Northfield have not diminished. To the contrary, financial needs and corresponding stress levels have significantly increased in recent years. According to the recent Northfield news article, the demands of social services in Rice County has exploded since 2008. As the economy sours and local government revenue decline, according to the county records in 2009, nearly 12% of residents living below the poverty level. Today, a full quarter of the residents are. Likewise, issues such as cancer, divorce, substance abuse, unemployment, mental health crisis, bullying, custody battles, child abuse and neglect, and truancy continue. In light of these statistics, we believe social work at all levels in the district to be invaluable in keeping students on task in the classroom. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I'm Shelley Hansen, and I'm a school social worker at the Early Childhood Program at Longfellow. I'm a .4, and I also work as a psychologist in private practice. My view is that the Northfield schools are already on a bare bones budget for student support services. School social workers are your frontline people working with crises, students, and families with the greatest of need. My current .4 position is assisting with the special education assessments, and I provide social work services. The majority of my time is spent in the homes of the poorest people in Northfield. I have requests on how to get more food till their food stamps come in. Can I help them find a bed because all 5 of them are sleeping on a 1-inch foam pad? I will be homeless in 1 month. Where will I take my children? How do you sign up for medical assistance? My 5 and 3-year-old were sexually abused by a babysitter. Where do I go next? I'm not overreacting. I'm not exaggerating on any of that. This is the same work that all our school social workers do at every age level. This is hard material to graph or to quantify how to prove the valuable role of school social work. I do agree with Dr. Lewis's vision on having school social workers funded with 50% special education funds and 50% general education funds, because the crises, the mental health issues, and poverty are not just happening with the special education population. This does free us up to work with all people in need. However, then general education does need to pick up this cost, which is regularly done in other districts, which I've worked in before coming to Northfield. I do not see solid thought and reason being put into the proposal of cutting social workers, which cuts services to the most vulnerable and needy people in Northfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board? Thank you. I want to remind the public that this opportunity is for speaking and not an opportunity to debate with the board, but we really appreciate hearing your thoughts. All right, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet the minutes from the last school board meeting, which took place on March 12th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? So moved by Jeff. Is there a second? Second. Second by Ann. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes from March 12th, 2012, say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to announcement and recognition.
Okay, and I have several this evening. First of all, would like to congratulate Jeff Peshta. He was named the Minnesota Association of Secondary Principals Middle Level Principal of the Year for the Southeast Division. So now he is up for consideration as far as the possibility of becoming the Minnesota Association of Secondary Principal Middle School Level Principal of the Year for the state. And so he is competing now against principals from other districts. I believe in the past, Dave, I think you were also the Southeast Minnesota representative. Yes. So again, congratulations to Jeff, and wish him best of luck as he moves forward with that process. Would also like to congratulate Sibley's annual Beyond Words event, the celebration of arts and literacy, and that is going to be held on Thursday, April the 12th. For any of you that haven't been to that, it's quite a time, and fantastic chance to see art and literature combined, and an opportunity to see the variety of different things that students have done. And so great opportunity on Thursday the 12th. We'd also like to congratulate the following students that participated in the South Central Service Co-op Mankato Community Education Spring Chess Tournament in the elementary division in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. Peter Hillman and Colin Thomas Green tied for 1st place. Peter and Colin both attend Sibley Elementary School, so guessing there may be some practicing, or at least joining up in terms of that practice. Also in the upper division, grades 6 through 12, Jackson Hillman tied for 4th place, and grade level winners were Peter Hillman and Colin Thomas Green, who tied for 1st place at the 2nd grade level. Also, Jackson Hillman came in first place at the 7th grade level. It's a little confusing, but I think I'm sorting it out. There's a level in terms of overall level, and then there's a level by grade level. So again, congratulations to those folks for their chess acumen. The following middle school students received honorable mention or were named as state qualifiers at the Regional History Day competition held last Tuesday on the Minnesota State Mankato campus. I'm going to try to do this the best I can, but I've checked with all of my usual sources, and they've been able to give me some help on some of the names, but there may be a couple that I mess up, and again, I apologize in advance for that. First of all, in individual exhibits, honorable mention went to Lizzie Wager, and Bryn Muha. State qualifiers include Tyler Hoban, Michael Malika, Alexandra Lund, Zachariah Hewitt, and Barrett Hendel. Group exhibits, honorable mentions went to Mallory Tadona and Caroline Hummel. And state qualifiers include Nicole Malika and Ryan Malika, and Anne France and Brooke Schubel. Individual performances, honorable mention went to Brent Weber and Renee Giza. Individual documentaries, honorable mention went to Finn Muir, and state qualifiers included Danny Avon, and Courtney Pasqua. Group documentary, state qualifiers included Alita Dice and Kyle Betcher. So again, congratulations to all those folks, many of whom will be going on to the State History Day competition. Thank you.
Very good. All right, we are ready to move on to the first item for discussion and report, and that is Bridgewater is going to share with us their professional learning community report. And I'll remind board members that in your table file you had PowerPoints.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to take this opportunity to share with the board with one of our PLCs is working on right now, and that's our 4th grade PLC. But you'll see a common theme that's running through all of our PLCs, and that's the work with their flexible grouping and all the work with the differentiation, trying to meet the needs of all students. And that's one of the things I'd like to highlight about all of our PLCs within the district, is I think that people are working harder right now to meet the needs of all the students at each level, not just one group of students or another group of students. So this has been work in the makings, and it's a nice time to highlight them. So here's our 4th grade team. We've got Dana Holden, Adam Danielson, Renee Schuster, and Janet Rockney.
Good evening. I'm Dana Holden. I teach 4th grade contemporary at Bridgewater. This is Adam Danielson, my team teacher. Renee Schuster and Janet Larimore-Rockney teach in the Compañeros program. And for 2 years now, we've been working together with flexible grouping in both reading and math. Our focus is to differentiate, as Nancy said, our instruction to meet the needs of all students. Okay, I don't know how to do this. That's not how. Yes, it is. Okay. This is my first PowerPoint I've ever done. Here you see our SMART goals. We have separate SMART goals in the areas of reading and math. And we do it different ways for each subject. So in math, our focus is on our grade level curriculum. And we want 100% of our students to meet our grade level expectations, which is 70%, or higher on unit post-tests. Some students already meet that goal on the pretest. We have students who are at or above that goal on the pretest, and so we expect them to make gains as well. And so if they are scoring within that grade level expectation, we expect growth as follows in the subcategories. In reading, we use the MAP test, and we take the data from September and use that for a grouping, which we'll explain in a moment. And our target is for all students, all 4th grade classes, to make 100% or more of their target growth in the reading MAP test from fall to spring.
Hi, and I'm going to just talk briefly about how we determine our flex groups. The goal is to meet the needs of all the students, and so we use assessment data. In the case of math, we use pre-tests on each unit, and based on how students score on those pre-tests and what their needs are in terms of the skills that they have not mastered, we will group them into 5 different groups for the duration of that math unit. And they will get specific help for 20 minutes each day on those skills that they most need help with. If they've already met those or mastered those skills, then we do extended practice for those students who have already mastered those skills. In the case of Reading Flex, we use the measures of academic progress, and we pull out these scores in various substrands and they can be very specific. We'll see an example in a future slide here of how specific those skills are. And we take those students based on how they scored in that substrand, and we group them accordingly, again, into 5 different groups for flex grouping. The goal of flex grouping is not to have a permanent grouping, but to have a temporary grouping. They are grouped according to what they need for the skills that they were assessed on. And then when we finished with that unit or that 2 or 3 weeks of study, then we do new groups based on new skill needs. And so the students are constantly, the groups are constantly changing, and there are various sizes as we go through the year.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about how we flex group for math. First thing, like we said, we pre-test every kid, and then our math flex group is a second scoop. So we still have the regular curriculum that they're in, their classes, or Dana and I ability group between our 2 classes for math. And then it's a second scoop is the math flex. And we divide them amongst the 5 different teachers. The group sizes could be between 5 and 25 students. What we usually do is we take the students that are in most need and put them with one of the teachers, or we have a Title I teacher that works with us, and they'll get the small group of 5 students because they're in our greatest need. And then we just kind of find the areas that, we target the areas that they need. Like they said, the groups are fluid and they change unit to unit. It's in the last thing it says, what if students do not meet our grade level expectation at the end of the unit test? What I do is I teach math between Dana and I's class, and Janet Rockney does too. Like if a student doesn't pass like in algebra, they're below 70%, we'll do like an extra lunch group, bring kids in that need that extra help and work with those kids, and that's been very beneficial for that. This graph here just shows from pre-test to post-test, Unit 2 through Unit 8. Unit 1, we didn't do it just because we were just getting to know the kids. We still pre-tested them, but we didn't chart the data as much. And then you can kind of see there the increases in percentages. There are a couple good units, definitely Unit 5, when kids, we had 90% of the kids. That was their average test on the post-test of all kids. So huge growth through that area on all the unit tests so far. And this last graph here talks about our MAP test. You see on the left there, that's where our fall MAP tests were. And then the one on the right, that's our winter MAP test. So you can see, especially if you look at the 2 areas, above grade level, we increased the percentages at 95th percent and higher, and also above grade level median and higher. Those both went up. And also, if you go to the other end, the red area below grade level, you see that was at 27 and 7/10%, and we reduced that down to 18% on that. So, both our high level and our low level, we got some good numbers shown this year from our data.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the reading. We use the MAP data for our reading, and again, it's a second scoop. So we teach our own classes, the core curriculum, and then we do the flex grouping as an additional 20 minutes each day, except Wednesdays because of late start. We have, both programs are involved, so it's 4 classrooms full of kids, and we split them into 5 groups because we have a reading specialist who works with us as well. And again, the groups vary in size from 5 to 25 students. We target the areas of greatest need according to the standardized tests and our grade level requirements. And again, the groups are fluid and they change from unit to unit, which is about every 2-3 weeks or so. The way we group them is we use the MAP data, and there are strands and then substrands, which I'll explain a little bit more with the next slide. Can you just move on to the next? Oh, thank you. This is from Viewpoint, and it lists all of our students where that gray area is, that would all be student names, and that tells you on the right what are the different concepts are that they need practice with. And an example would be one that we did at the beginning of the year. The strand is use knowledge of root words, antonyms, and synonyms. And sorry, that's a substrand, which is underneath word recognition analysis and vocabulary expansion. And then what we do is take the range. So on this current map data that we have students scoring between 171 and 232. So we have a huge range to deal with or to work with. And so we each take a group of students, a range. So students in the range of 171 to 190, they might be working on rhyming words or base words, simple synonyms and antonyms. And then as it goes higher, the kids that are in the 211 to 232 range, they're working on multiple meaning words, Latin roots rather than base words, and then more complex synonyms and antonyms. And here are our results. The left is the fall, the right is winter. And you can see the red area, which is the below grade level, has gone from 35% to 22.3%. So we've really decreased that group. And the high end to the above grade level, which is in blue, we went from 40.4% up to 47.9%. And then the 95th percentile started at 1.1% and up to 2.1%. Any questions for us?
Board members? Questions? Carrie?
I'm wondering if I'm understanding this right, the compañeros in the contemporary classrooms group their own students and teach the core concepts. And then the second scoop is where you do this flex grouping that could be as many as 5 groups.
Yeah.
And so is math still taught in Spanish in compañeros?
In the core, during the core time, yes.
Okay.
Math is taught in Spanish during my core time. During that 20 minutes, I will have contemporary students as well, so then
Okay, so all of that is done then in English.
that's done in English, although I slip. And I tell them, siéntense en frente de la clase, and they look at each other. But they usually figure it out, and then I realize when I see that confused look that I have to switch to English, but yeah,
okay.
but I do that in
It's
English.
meant to be in English,
Yeah.
the 20 minutes.
Okay. And is that become an issue for the students who've learned those concepts in Spanish to have that extra help in English, or does it, or are you finding that that's beneficial?
Actually, I'm finding it beneficial. In particular, right now we're reviewing for MCA testing and reviewing some of the math vocabulary that my students hear in Spanish all the time, and they're going to see it on the MCAs in English. So I think it's actually beneficial for them to hear some of those same concepts in English.
And then just to clarify, the second scoop is that's the approach you take to the literacy part also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Good. Interesting.
I think one of the best things that has happened as a result of this is that we all know all the 4th graders now because we get to work with all of them and they're changing and it can be very confusing. But everybody does figure out where they're going, and we get the kids where they are and take them further. And so that has been, I think, one of the best parts.
Well, I was thinking that when you were presenting, that the compañeros and the contemporary getting to have the mix of the students too is really an added bonus.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments, board members? Julie?
I just had a comment. It was a great presentation. I loved when you outlined the range so that we can really see. I mean, I've always had a feeling that flex groupings are a really positive thing that we've done, but it's really interesting. Without those flex groups, you have a teacher trying to teach to those ranges, and that's very difficult. So it's really dramatic point. And secondly, I applaud you for making flex groupings work so often in the school day that you're actually meeting 20 minutes each day. I think that's really wonderful. So kudos to you for that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about the PLC.
And there's thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nancy and everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next item for discussion, board members, is the high school world language program enrollment. And you received in your packet last time, and then again in your packet a memo from Joel, and Dr.
And
Richardson...
actually, two sets of data, one that you
right.
helped to put together.
Right. So I guess really the question that we're going to focus on to begin with is just the past 3 years, the Board of Education determined that a 0.4 FTE of the contingency fund, which is approximately $20,000, should be set aside to provide for the staffing of 2 sections of low enrollment for world language. And I guess the question is, do we want to continue that? And let's, I guess, start with just that as the discussion point.
And I think maybe to take the frame just a little bit farther, with the idea that over the last couple of years we've had to deal with less than the 3.0 in terms of contingency funding because of budget reductions and so on that we've dealt with. I think the real question we're asking is, the core question we're asking is the board believing that maintaining 4 foreign language options for students at this time is a signature part of what it means to be a student in Northfield? And if it is, then what we're asking the board to look at is to say on an ongoing basis, we're going to look at providing at least 0.4 of an FTE so that we do not end up with having to use contingency funding in the future to try to cover this. Because the reality is we're constantly looking for dollars over the course of time to deal with support for class sizes that are very, very high, or class sizes that are out of sync with other classes that we have at various levels. We're still dealing as the Compañeros program moves through the next several years and we move toward now having just a single section of Compañeros. We still have multiple sections at upper grade levels in at least 2 of the buildings. And so we're constantly facing the issue of having unbalanced class sizes. And I guess our hope is if the board really believes on an ongoing basis this is a signature program that we should be maintaining as part of what makes Northfield Northfield, then our hope would be that the board would simply say, yes, we understand that, and we're willing to set aside that 0.4 of an FTE to make sure that that's maintained regardless of the size of classes. That way then Joel has the ability with the allocated FTE that he receives to support all the rest of the staff within the building and is not having to look at or wonder each year, will a portion of his FTE need to be allocated to address those very small class sizes, while his other class sizes are averaging about 30 to 32 kids per classroom. And so that's really what we're looking for on the part of the board, is some kind of a long-term direction on this, because we've really had to come back and talk to you in one way or the other over the last several years. The answer's been the same each time. And so our hope is that maybe we can come to a resolution where we say, just understand this is a part of what it is to do business in Northfield and a part of what we're doing to try to support that very comprehensive academic program. And if so, then we take it off the table so that it is dealt with without it being part of the allocation. All right, that was probably 50 cents worth for a 5-cent question, but that's really the core issue. And Joel, is there anything I've missed in that?
No, I don't think so. I think that really the issue is that it's, in the first year when we did this, we looked at potential reductions in 2 of the world languages at higher levels. And when I brought those concerns to the board, the concern was, essentially cutting a level. For example, if it's a 4-year sequential program and you're cutting level 3 because there are 5 or 6 students there, you're setting up a situation where kids assumed, taking the first 2 years of that language, that there would be a 3rd year there. So I think that it's a matter of being able to establish clearly that we are going to continue, with the 4 offerings we have, regardless of that enrollment number. And if it were, if we were in a different economic situation where those FTE that we contribute to the smaller classes didn't impact the greater whole so significantly, but it can be, as I look at numbers for enrollment, it can be the difference between a series of sections in social studies, for example, of 32 versus 36. And a lot of that play is an annual question. There are some times when you can, because the way the numbers play out in a student-driven enrollment or a student-driven schedule, the numbers don't vary as dramatically in other areas when you're adding or subtracting a section. But there are those years in the last 2 or 3 years have been examples of that, where to grab that 0.2 from someplace else and add it to a particular world language, or in the case of what we've done the last 3 years, that 0.4, it does have the tendency to be pretty significant in those areas where you have to pull it from to make up for those enrollment numbers.
Probably the one other thing that I think we need to look at with this is, unlike any other courses that we provide, the world language is the most tied to the sequencing or the steps. With the idea, as Joel said, if you would drop a world language 3 out or world language 2 out because of enrollment, then you pretty much eliminate the ability for that student then to go on to the next level. That's pretty unique in terms of our course offerings. Most other course offerings that we have, the prerequisites don't require that kind of a lockstep process to get to the end point. And that probably with world language is different, I think, than pretty much anything else I can think of right away in terms of really having a profound impact if a particular level is removed or dropped away because of the lack of significant enrollment.
I guess one of the questions I have...
Wait, can you just
sorry.
hold on 1 second though, before we jump into... I wanted to, before we jump into questions, the extra spreadsheet that's on there, which was something I was sharing with Dr. Richardson because I kept asking questions of Joel and Jeff, and I wanted to get a better sense of what I was asking. So this is a little complicated because I wasn't intending it to be for the group, but the one thing I was trying to get at was I was looking at persistence numbers, and I was trying to get a sense of that. So that if you were, most of the numbers that you would need would really be looking at, Joel provided here, and the Chinese numbers are different than what you had in your previous memo. And then I was just looking, mainly the attrition column would be the only one that would be additional. So, all right.
And again, I think, and I really appreciated the fact that Ellen had kind of delved into taking the original document that Joel had looked at and then basically kind of giving it that extra step. I think the important thing to look at it is in terms of kind of looking on the diagonals. So in other words, if you look at German and you're basically looking at German 2 in 2011-12 with 11 students, you see that in 2012-13 when those German 2 students move to German 3, it drops to 6. So that's, as Evan is talking about, it's really, we're looking at the attrition numbers that are occurring as students are moving from level to level. But we're also looking at just the overall numbers when we look at an average 5-year enrollment at each of the levels of these particular courses. And again, in light of the fact that in other courses that we have, and especially in our required courses, we're looking at numbers in the low to mid-30s on a fairly regular basis.
Let's, if you don't mind, Ann, John, do you want to say what you were
go back.
trying to
Yeah, and follow up on that. I guess the question is, why is there an attrition? Why are 11 and 12 students not following from German 3 to German 4 and German 4 to German 5? Has anybody talked to those students and found out why they're not finding this program valuable from one year to the next?
I can speculate. We haven't talked directly to those students, but I think one of the resulting factors of a schedule like the one we offer, where we have so many options for kids, is that we end up having so many options, and in this case, in this year, 71 options that are singletons. So they're offered a single time a day. So we will have a student having to choose between orchestra and German 5 or Spanish 6. I can't say that that's the only reason, certainly, but I know that that does become a key component when students are looking, particularly through their juniors and senior years, when they have limitations placed upon them by their schedule, and also, like I said, those that are instrumentalists or vocalists who've been doing choir, orchestra, and band for a number of years that want to stick with that, are poised with sometimes the same question, saying, well, do I take the last year of a language or this other singleton that I want, AP Government, or another singleton course? So at least in part, that's part of the component involved.
Ann?
I just wanted to point out, if anyone's confused too, about the Chinese program having its rotation. So those numbers are different from year to year because of what sections are offered.
Correct, right.
Yeah.
After, I
That
believe it was in the-
becomes a little confusing if you don't understand that. That
Yes, the zeros aren't reflective of the number of students who enrolled that year.
Right.
That's representative of the course that wasn't offered, because we have a 0.4 limitation with our Chinese teachers. So we developed a cycle in the third year of the language program to allow for students to do 3 years, essentially, under a teacher who was really here for 2 sections of the class.
Right, thanks.
Okay, board members, other comments, questions?
Well, Joel, I'm curious about, I have a lot of questions. And I think really what's being asked here is, should we reduce our language offerings, or should we commit to maintaining them so that you're not having to look for contingency funds to meet these classes? I mean, is that it in a nutshell, right?
I think that's a fair summary.
So I mean, I really just have lots and lots of questions. Like, for one thing, it's clear this has been an issue for some of these higher level, well, actually along the way, but particularly for the higher level courses for a number of years. And I'm sort of wondering how that's been handled in the past, and whether a solution for now might be to maybe shift another language to the type of rotation that Chinese does, and whether that would be a possible solution. So that's sort of, one kind of question. I'll just throw them all at you, and
Sure,
you can
that's fine.
do, kind of a summative response. Another question I think that's out there is, do you have a sense, if we reduced our language choices, whether those language students would just sort of be absorbed into other language options? Or do you think kids would go, as I know some do already, to the colleges for, the language that they really want to take? Or might they transfer to another school district that does offer the language that they want to take? And then I guess I just have other more general questions about, has there been any kind of independent research done on what other schools are doing? We see things in the paper about, this program is going to be offered, particularly language programs, and particularly Chinese seems to always get a splash in the paper. So what research has been done on what other schools are doing with their language programs? And, not necessarily we want to copy them, but just by point of information. Has there been research done on what businesses' needs are? What is going to be best for what languages would be best for our students as, potential job seekers? Has there been communication with colleges on, not just the ones in town, but just generally colleges, as to, are there languages that might be more desirable for students who are applying to schools? And, I've got sort of anecdotal, we all read the papers and listen to the news and take our kids on their college hunts. So, there's some anecdotal evidence, but has there been any kind of hard research done on any of that in this context?
I would stop short of calling it hard research, but I would say that in terms of the question, I'll kind of do them in reverse order. Your question about which languages best prepare students for kind of the outside world and business opportunities and so on, I think, the answer would be yes. Depending on what options kids are pursuing, if you talk with Ms. Winkleman in German, one of the, I guess I would describe it as a sales pitch that she gives to the middle school students during, right around the time of registration, is all of the business and professional opportunities that are out there for students who are, one, bilingual, but specific to her program, bilingual in German and English. Obviously, we have a more local awareness of how Spanish can impact us in terms of our communication with our own community. But, and I think that the relevance of Spanish in our community, as well as the Compañeros program, both work hand in hand to put those numbers in a place where it makes sense that they reside. But I think specific to French, Chinese, and German, I would say that 4 or 5 years ago, there was probably a push that had Chinese probably leading the way in terms of the language of kind of a world language, so to speak, kind of a universal business language. And I think that has dropped off a bit. And perhaps that's that's being reflected in the numbers of students. And it's also, the reality is that Chinese is not an easy language either. And that's not and no language is easy, and no language is necessarily dramatically more difficult than the others. But I think some of the language choices are about true commitment to that particular culture, or that they have specific career and business opportunities in mind to pursue. And then in reverse order, the question about absorbing into other language programs, and I didn't mean to mention this when John asked the question about kind of what's causing the attrition. Part of it is that the number of language offerings provide students the opportunity to take multiple languages. So some of the students that, if we did, and it's kind of a two-pronged answer, because I think that if the board were to say we need to look to reduce, that wouldn't mean that I just carte blanche get to start picking the sections that are the smallest and eliminating them. I think that there needs to be a methodical process involved that says, okay, over the next couple of years, how do we prepare students for that? That if it's something that we're bringing in at an entry level at the middle school with Mr. Peshta, and essentially moving a particular language out over time, that is a direction as much as a direction would be to say we're going to fund it indefinitely. So I would see if the board's determination is that you want to look at a reduction of the number of languages offered, then I think the secondary question would be, okay, and how do we best approach that? Last year at this time you mentioned the idea of a task force getting together to talk about world language in our district, and I would say that would be a process that we would want to involve some stakeholders to say, how is it best served? There have been districts where they've just said and cut a program that are in more financial dire straits at the time, and so that's those are the types of decisions they make to answer a real short-term need. But I would see a process in place there that would tackle that. So to the question of would they be absorbed in other language programs, I think we have a pretty significant clientele of students who are taking languages for the love of learning a language. Some are doing it for that perceived need for higher ed. But we have a number of students who take 2, sometimes 3. We had a student graduated 3 years ago, who accessed the highest level of all 4 of our languages, and just set his mind to doing that and did so. So some are already semi-absorbed in those other languages. But I would see, that there is going to be a group of students for whom, languages serve a purpose in terms of checking something off for their college resume. For others, it's about the experience of learning that foreign language and being bilingual or trilingual, as the case might be. And then your final question was about language rotation, and I think absolutely anything's, I would say it would be an option if we want to look at something that's going to essentially reduce the number of FTE for the program, but try to maintain it at its maximum size. Schools around our area of our size don't typically offer 4 languages. They might have 4 languages, but they're not offering them in-house. It might be through, I'm going to date myself referring to ITV, but doing a system where they're essentially working as a co-op with other school districts, where one teacher in a particular district is providing the instruction, and usually over video conferencing. So there are also other options to look at there that would be cost saving, similar to not similar, but essentially the decision we made when we farmed out our students who do the agricultural classes at Randolph. Something similar to that, where we're splitting the difference so that both schools can benefit, but one school isn't owning the cost of the whole program.
that cover your?
Yeah, I mean, it's all food for thought, you know?
I would say, just to follow up on what other schools are doing, would reinforce that for a district of our size, we have more language offerings than almost anybody else I can think of. You need to get one size bigger, probably about double. You get to the Edina Minnetonka size with a equivalent or an additional amount of funding per student to go with it. Then you're up to the 7 or 8 different languages that might be offered in those kinds of programs, which would be kind of the cream of the crop in terms of opportunities. And again, I guess that's why I would like to, to try to come back to that initial question that I asked, which is, I think as a board, if you're saying to us, and I think Joel and I are absolutely fine if that's what you're saying to us, is we really believe this is a signature part of what makes Northfield Northfield, then, say to us, yes, we'll underwrite that additional 4/10 so we can maintain this. That won't stop us from looking at rotations or other strategies to try to help keep costs in check. But if the message really is we want to maintain all 4 of those languages for as long as we possibly can, then I think we have a direction to go with. And at the same time, I guess the important thing is to know, is the board willing to say, no, you don't have to continue to try to figure out how to take this out of the contingency, because this is not something that changes from year to year. And if you remember when we initially put the contingency funding in place, the idea was it was kind of the one time, 1 year, the money went back into the district fund at the end of the year so it could support various high needs programs, like a year when we had 52 kids in calculus, or a year where we had 36 kids in a compañeros classroom, where we just knew those numbers were just not feasible. And I think it's important for us to be able to know that resource is available to do kind of those 1 year pieces. We're not seeing this as being a 1 year thing. And again, I would reinforce, we are perfectly fine with the idea of the board saying to us, we need to maintain this over time. But then I guess I'd just like to have that out on the table so that we're not having to come back each year to try to think about, should we try to think about a reduction? Should we try to think about less than 4 languages, whatever? Because it seems that it's been pretty clear, at least to me, and I don't know for Joel, but to me, that the concept of having the 4 languages in place is very important for us. And and we've done some modifications with the rotation and other things to try to address not only the staffing availability we have, but the funding that's in place. And it would just very much help us not to really be in that situation where that's a thing we have to do each and every year if we know that that's really where the board wants to be.
Okay. Ann?
I'm in favor of making this a sort of permanent situation rather than a contingency fund every year. And I'm very supportive of our 4 languages and the quality those programs have at this time, and the opportunity for our students. So I would like to move that we do accept that 4/10 to be designated for the foreign language classes.
Are you looking for a motion?
And my only encouragement there would be, if you choose to do that, let's add that as an item for action tonight, because really this is discussion, but we could simply go into the action items, and you could make
a motion to move it into an action item.
Yeah, you could. Well, you don't even have to do that. You just basically, we would move to the action items, and then you would request or put a motion on the table to approve that as a permanent piece. I think Robert would be happy.
Right.
Bob would even be okay, I think, if we do that.
Right. Other board members? Jeff?
Well, somebody has to second it, right? Second.
Oh,
Well, no,
We don't need to.
because
can't.
we're not going to take that action until we move to the
Items for action.
items for action.
I was just going to make the point for other departments, if this department wants to add $20,000 onto something that we have, 4 languages, we could go down to 3, whether it be agriculture or whatever else. I mean, what is, what are, in the, I don't know, fairness is the right word, but I'm sure there's other arguments for other departments that, see that as we're having 4 languages here and pushing, and just the opposite of, and I'm not disagreeing with it, I'm just saying that, this is one department and we're trying to be the cutting edge echelon here when what is $20,000 in the scheme of things to other departments, and maybe there's something there that, is more of a priority or less. And you mentioned agriculture. When I hear that, because we're kind of getting away from FFA and we're partnering with Randolph and doing that kind of stuff, and I'm wondering, if they had the opportunity to have another $20,000 in their budget, what would they do with it? That kind of thing. And if we went back down to 3 languages, so I'm not against the argument. I'm just phrasing in the scheme of things, what is $20,000 in other departments that aren't here asking for it?
John?
Well, when I was a student here, and when you were, Jeff, there were 4 languages.
Okay.
And the 4th language was Latin, which I guess we've gotten rid of, and maybe there's good reasons for that. But the future is people who have command of more than 1 language, and that's actually the present. I mean, I was, because I studied German here and in college, I've been able to use that not just in Germany and Austria and Switzerland, but in Hungary and the Czech Republic and Italy and Afghanistan, and it's been useful in all those places because though I'm not fluent, I'm able to communicate and I'm able to do things. And that is the kind of skill that students need to have. And I think if students aren't understanding that and aren't taking advantage of these programs, then what we need to do is find ways to encourage them to understand the importance of learning languages. I was in The Hague about 18 months ago, and I was having dinner with a guy from Lebanon, and he has a daughter who's a year younger than mine. And he was saying he's Lebanese, his wife is Italian, he speaks to his daughter in Arabic, his wife speaks to her in Latin, and in preschool, because she was 4 at the time, she was learning English and Dutch. And that's the competition. That's who these kids have to be prepared to compete against. And it's not enough to speak 1 language, and you have to be able to have these skills, you have to be able to learn languages, study languages, and not just your own. And being able to study these languages really improves your ability to speak in your own language and write in your own language. And those are the skills that we need to be offering, and we need to be encouraging these students to not drop out of these programs and find ways to keep them in the programs. And that doesn't, if it means that what we have to do in some kind of short-term sense is offer some of these higher level programs to motivated students over webcasts or distance learning or something like that, maybe that's what we need to do. But I think instead of looking for ways to constrict these offerings, we need to find ways to improve them. Frankly, we should be offering Arabic. Or find a way to give kids exposure to all of these languages and not less.
So the argument, which is a good one, is just to be competitive in the world, to learn these languages. And it's kind of ironic when you bring back to our years. I did go on to college, and I hadn't taken any languages in school, so I had to take 2 semesters in college. So I ended up having to, and I took Norwegian, which was interesting. But the point is that I didn't have that, and I had to take it later as I went on to college. And obviously, any of these students that are that involved in the languages are probably well on their way to some good school somewhere.
Well, and I took Norwegian in college too, and when I got to Norway, the Norwegians said, "Why did you bother? There's only 4 million people you can talk to." But I speak Minnesotan too, so that's another 4 million people.
Thanks, John. Julie?
Well, I absolutely can't agree with John more. I think that we really do have to be sure that we're positioning the kids to really compete globally. And, you know, by 2020, China will be the world's largest economy. So, you know, the influence there in their economy already is felt, but will continue to grow. And I think it's interesting that you could really have a broader conversation about, in all of our areas, are we really offering courses that are going to allow our kids to compete? You know, in IT and facts and, you know, robotics or whatever is out there in terms of what employers are going to be looking for. And over spring break, Hannah Pushko and I were at a mayoral summit in Minneapolis, and the focus was out of school time for kids and programs that, you know, allow them to grow and to, you know, reach success. But more importantly, obviously, as a board, we can impact that, you know, as a school district in terms of what we're offering kids. And absolutely, are we positioned all across our district in all of our offerings at the high school, not just language, but all our course offerings, are we really offering what these kids need, you know, to succeed? What do they need to get to college, and what is the workforce? I mean, the conversations about jobs, and, you know, you hear about high-tech type jobs that are being left unfilled because there aren't students who are able to do those jobs. And so long-term, where do we focus ourselves as a district? And I think the conversation about world language absolutely fits into that in terms of how we position ourselves. And the education process, absolutely. Do kids realize coming out of high school with Chinese, going to college, and what employment opportunities will be available to them because they speak Chinese and have that background? Will be huge.
Thanks, Julie. So it sounds like we're starting to reach consensus that the 4 world languages, Jeff has made a point that we should consider the 20,000. But Noel, did you have another point you wanted to add?
Only that Mr. Roberts of Roberts Rules of Orders would prefer that this motion and discussion be in the items for individual action. So that we should delay it until the next part of the board meeting.
Discussion? Okay. Okay, so I think we have...
I don't disagree with the discussion, but it ought to be moved a little
But
farther.
both Bob and Robert would prefer to...
So what I was going to say is I think we're starting to reach consensus on what Dr. Richardson and Joel had wanted to hear, and I think we're ready to move on to the next item for discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, board. Our next item for discussion is Matt Hillman sharing with us another technology transformation next step.
We're bringing these to you over the last several months in bite-sized chunks because if I speak too long, Dr. Richardson has a big stick that he pokes me with. But no, you know, in February, you approved our district technology plan. At the last meeting, though we were running late, we gave you some short demonstrations of some of the tablet types of technology that we've been looking at. And I just want to remind you that over the past several months, through the capable leadership of Heather Ryden and myself in terms of co-facilitating what we called at that time the iPad working group, and now we're looking at it as transformational technology for the modern learner, because that's really what it truly is. We had more than 30 educators from across all of our buildings, all the way from early childhood special ed up to advanced placement course teachers, come together and look at modern technology and how can we transform the way that we teach and students learn by using these new devices that are continuing to develop at a rapid pace, at a pace that no one can keep up with. And that research and the discussion really led to a recommendation to our district technology steering committee, which really said that they wanted that group to consider a very aggressive timeline for looking at giving every student in our district some kind of tablet technology. And at that point, and at this point, we're still looking at the iPad as we continue to research other areas. The fact is that that is what we are kind of focusing on at this point, though we are always open to looking at other kinds of pieces. So the key thing that I want to just share with you tonight, and I suppose that I should switch over to my visuals. You did get a handout in the board packet that's going to generally be. Also look at it as a notebook, and this is just one of probably hundreds of notebook apps that are available out there. This one is a very popular one called Evernote, which if you know our occupational therapist and assistive technology guru Greg Sumner, I think he might work for them on the side because he loves Evernote so much. But Evernote is a very, very cool, again, you can use a PC, you can use a Mac, you can use an iPad, you can use an Android device, you can use whatever it is that you want, and you can take notes. And the beautiful thing about a notebook that is so much more, in this particular one right here, it's not a great screenshot, but you see within that notepad you can take pictures. And now if you go to conferences, you're starting to see people, dorks like myself, who are holding up their iPhones or their iPads as the speakers are talking and taking snapshots of their PowerPoint presentation and embedding them within their notes. Imagine that as a student, if you had that ability to include those visuals, that piece that can jog your memory within your notebook. So we're looking at transformational technology that it's a notebook, but yet so much more flexible. We're looking at this as the anywhere, anytime library of the world at your fingertips in everybody's hands. It's not, I have to go down to this terminal. It's right here in my hands. I can gain access to anything. Most of you probably have been in a car at some point with your smartphone and someone says, oh, what's the deal with that? And oh, let's look it up. Last summer on our vacation out east, every time we hit a new state, we pulled up Wikipedia on the iPhone and we started talking about what's the history of this state? What's the history of this particular community that we just stopped in? The opportunity for learning is endless. And it even goes to the next level. The brief demonstration that I did last month showed how we can now search the internet by taking a picture. If you recall, I took a picture of that piece of art right over there, and it came back with information about Mr. Hopper and those kinds of pieces. My favorite piece is a graduate professor of mine in my doctoral program put this image up at the beginning of our doctoral class this semester and said, who do you think this person is? And we were supposed to talk. It was obviously an 18th century individual. I took a picture with my phone. I said, is it Johann Pestalozzi? How'd you get that? You know, and I had no idea, but I took a picture of it, and it searched the internet and found it. If that is not transformational, I don't know what is. So the ability to have the world's library in your pocket, and if you imagine that as a student, and I'm curious about this, I now have access to answer those questions that are burning in my mind at any moment. I like this to say it's a differentiation tool with muscle. And I've just got a couple of different app icons here, and when it comes to the area of reading, some of you may be familiar with a program that we use in the district called Reading A to Z. And what Reading A to Z does is it provides leveled materials off the internet that you can find certain genres that a kid might like, and you can print them off. So if, you can actually print these small books. Well, there is now a group that very wisely has put these pieces in app form in all of the different areas. This one is for a cost, but still, if you think about it, it offers for about $7. It offers between 12 and 20 titles at a particular leveled library, which it just extends. We've got some really great leveled libraries in our elementaries, but imagine the ability to bring that home even further. This other one is a very interesting one called Word Joust, and if you've got an iOS device, I encourage you to consider it. It's a word prep piece for the SAT. So just right there, you have a variety of levels in which you can engage language on devices like this. And this is just one of how many hundreds of thousands of apps that are out there for iOS and for Android devices. We also like to say that it is a creation tool. Now, this would have been a controversial statement about 18 months ago when the first iPad came out because people were saying tablets are not creation tools. If you watch people, for example, right here, we have our local news reporter who is using her iPad to type her story. If you go, and she's using a keyboard, an option for some folks. But remember, it's adults who have trouble with that kind of piece. And if you watch kids on a tablet, they type incredibly fast. And now with the ability to split the keyboard, now they can leverage their thumb typing that they use even better. So the point is that it has become a creation tool. Is there word processing? Yes. Are there the ability to do spreadsheets? Sure. Are we going to write the great American novel on this kind of device? Probably not. Are we going to develop a large spreadsheet for a budget presentation that Mrs. Schaubeck might provide? Most likely not. But the other creation tools that are there are amazing, and the key thing for me as a person who believes wholeheartedly in differentiated learning and the theory of multiple intelligences, I have iMovie up here, which to me is one of the greatest creation tools of all time. It used to be we had to spend several $100s on a couple of cameras, and then only certain kids could have the cameras. Now you got to go to the computer lab and plug them in. when you go with devices like this, you have a movie studio in every single kid's hand if we were to go that route. The power of that is pretty incredible. If you've ever made a film, I think it's one of the highest order thinking skills. You have to think how I'm going to sequence. You're going to have to think how I'm going to present this. When am I going to cut the scene? All those kinds of pieces. This is where my dorkiness really shows. But I have seen kids who struggled to write the 5-paragraph essay, who put together commercials or small short videos that would blow your mind. And you say, and some of them I still remember to this day that I taught. Those people have kids now. I'm getting that old, you know, but they are so powerful, and it is part of their literacy of today. If you think about video, it is the new literacy. And so the fact that we can create on these devices, which 18 months ago people said, oh, not a creation tool. I see some of the point yet, but more and more applications are coming out each day where it is becoming more and more of a creation tool, and to me in the right way, especially with things like iMovie for iPad. And in addition, thank you, Ellen, for sending me these photos. Something that I think that has been talked about for years, and as a former junior high principal, I would regularly get calls in the fall saying, do you know how heavy that backpack is? You got my kid trudging home. Now, mind you, I was a principal in a building that our kids routinely spent half their day across the street at the high school because we were short on facilities. So they were lugging that thing all the way around. So I'm going to guess this is your 7th grader's backpack?
No, this was the sophomore.
Okay, this is the sophomore's backpack, okay? Actually, I think the 7th graders might be heavier.
Yeah.
So this is the picture that Ellen put her son's backpack on the scale, and drum roll please, we hit 40.6 pounds. So, I'm a dedicated student, and I know I've got to bring stuff back and forth. But maybe I'm a student who's struggling a little bit. I say, oh, geez, that backpack's going to get a little... It sounds foolish, but how many of you know that kids make decisions based upon that? And they absolutely... We're not even going to get into the health and all those other kinds of pieces that go with it. But the fact that we can essentially take that 40 pounds and more and put it into a device of this nature, I think is something that truly says we should consider, especially as the costs continue to come down. So the point of this is that I want to point out as well that for those of you who know me, I will never say that technology could replace what is truly the hallmark of education, which is our relationships. Education begins, ends, the sun rises and sets with relationships. But when we equip those people who are very skilled at developing relationships with modern tools that can help them reach more learners, I believe with the right kind of setup, you can personalize learning even more than we ever have in the past. We are a top flight district. We have people who make excellent connections every single day. This, I believe, will only enhance that by being able to get at more kids' passion, their spark, as Mr. Kraft likes to call it. When we can capture that kid's spark and we can use this tool to get them on the same academic trend, but maybe with that particular genre that they like, whether it's cars for a young Dr. Richardson, you know, or basketball for a young Mr. Sanis, whatever it would be, if we can get those things to get kids excited, we know that the academics come easier when you are passionate about something. So the information coming over the next few months will be that the District Tech Steering Committee has reviewed this recommendation of looking at a one-to-one initiative. Again, looking, I want to be very clear, we're not doing a one-to-one initiative yet, but we're looking at it. We're saying that what we need to do is also look at what are the things that we would prune when we look at a one-to-one environment. We no longer need to buy classroom computers for every classroom when every student would have an iPad in their hand, if that's the case. There are other pieces. Printing costs go down significantly. Why print when you can share on a screen? You know, so the point is, it will not be a cost-neutral activity, but there are a number of pieces of savings that would happen in order to make this a possibility. Important at this point now that that committee has looked at it, and I've talked to you about it for a couple months and no one's thrown anything at me. We're planning to schedule several informational meetings for a number of stakeholder groups. We're looking at going out and offering some community input sessions where we would do small group facilitated kinds of pieces to get feedback on what community members think of it. I'm looking at scheduling 3 of those. This has really been contained so far to our District Tech Steering Committee, to our district cabinet, and to those 36 people who are on that working group. we're going to offer some sessions at each individual building over the next few weeks to give some information like we're doing tonight. We're also going to record the information, so if you could bear to watch me again, we'd have it available on the website. And then I think most importantly, Amy Sieve, our wonderful middle school media specialist, and Rebecca Glazen, who's just awesome here at the high school as well, have started to select students at both buildings for focus groups. And so over the next week or so, we're going to be sitting down with groups of 8 to 12 students at those buildings and say, here are these whole list of questions we have about this kind of initiative. What do you think about that? What would you do if we were in that situation? So I think that that's an important thing for you to know. We're going out to all stakeholder groups and we're starting to ask those questions of the true implementation kinds of steps, if that makes sense. We are also looking at our district's wireless infrastructure. We spent a lot of time over the last several years on the wires behind the wall, and we now have some coverage in wireless across the district, but we would have to beef that up so that we could handle a significant number of these kinds of devices. In addition, one of the more important things will be discussing professional development, because you can't buy stuff and then not train people how to use it. And we'll be looking at professional development strategies, that we'll be looking at what we know from research about adult learning opportunities and how do adults learn, because they do learn differently than children. What adult learning strategies can we use to ensure that people feel prepared if we were to go down this route to use this in their classroom? And really, I actually think that the professional development may be more necessary for our pedagogically and our teaching rather than technology. If you Google on the internet anything with toddler and iPad, you'll get probably 100 videos of a 2-year-old, using the device. I've not met anyone yet, whether they were that young or that old. I mean, people in their 80s and 90s, when they get these kinds of devices, that don't say, wow, this is normal. It's like a book that I can press the button and something happens. So it's natural for people. So I'm more concerned about the pedagogical shift that we're going to have to consider as opposed to the technological shift, though obviously that's a piece to look at as well. We are currently considering what kind of timeline we would propose to you in terms of when would we look at this kind of shift. And we're developing this long list of issues that are as mundane as, have you ever been in our cafeteria here at the high school during lunchtime and you see backpacks around? Well, I imagine 100 iPads all with the same case, and you say, okay, how do you know which one is which? Now, there are some basics, kids can take a picture of themselves and that's their lock screen. That's one way. They'll of course have a number, but just very organizational issues like that, all the way up to when this is a textbook for students, what do we do when a student misuses? And obviously can't take their textbook away. How do we handle those kinds of pieces? And everything in between of them. I think I've got a list currently of 63 questions or something like that. And so that's the kind of piece that we're doing. And we are trying to look to bring a proposal to you sometime probably late April, early May. And we're doing a number of pieces in between then. We'll give you a couple of other highlight updates unless you tell Dr. Richardson, don't let that guy in front of us again. And so we just want to kind of give you an update in terms of that, where we're at. And again, we do think it is an opportunity to really consider transforming the way we do things. And technology in the past, we've always added it onto things. We've added computers, but we've never really risen to that level where we've transformed things. And this truly has that opportunity to transform not just teaching, but content and the way that it's learned. And so we just want to just give you this, again, little 10 or 15 minute kind of, it's not a teaser anymore, I suppose. We're getting into the meat of it.
Maybe beyond teaser.
But the point is that we are, every day, if you get those MSBA news clippings, there's another district who's going to this piece. We've all read about Lakeville and some other, and I said Northfield, we are not going to be first across the finish line with this one, but we'll be the ones who've done it right. And so we want to make sure that we do it right the first time. With that, I'll entertain any questions that you may have, or I'll exit stage left and let you get on with the meeting.
Thank you, Matt. Questions, comments?
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we should just take the vote tonight, Dr. Richardson.
No.
All right. We are now ready to move on to our items for individual action, and we have one on the agenda at this time. It's the staffing modifications and additions. And Dr. Richardson, do you have?
Okay. And again, in your materials, we reproduced again the memorandum that I provided to you last time. again, I think the overall frame with this, and as we're thinking in terms of moving forward, the idea here is that there are some big picture issues coming with this that we believe we're at the time when it makes the most sense for us to try to address it, and that is when we can operate from a position of strength. We have placed ourselves in a position where I think we can now make some significant adjustments and changes and address a couple of really important components. The first of those components is really looking at how we address the situation when students aren't learning. And in the past, when we worked with that, oftentimes it's taken us extra time, or trying to find additional resources, or trying to approach it in a different way. What we really believe now with response to intervention, the RTI process, is that we have the capability now of kind of putting all the pieces together that we've been working on over the last 8 years. Starting with the concept of data and really getting a handle on what's the data that we have about students, what do we know about how they're learning, how quickly they're learning, where are they struggling, are there strands where a particular student is not doing well, or a particular group of students is not doing well, or a student or students have already captured and mastered the content before it even gets presented. And sitting with the fact that if we continue to operate with the idea that we're simply going to just dole out the information, and those that get it, that's great. Those that are bored, well, they're bored, but they've still got it. And those that don't get it, well, maybe they're never going to get it, or we're going to wait until they fail to the point when we can place them in special education. And I think as a district, we are at a point where we believe we are now ready to create that systematic and systemic intervention plan, a strategy that says we're going to be able to intervene with kids as soon as we see that they're not being able to be successful, or that they already have it and they're ready to move on, and that we're going to address that directly. As part of that, we really believe there are several components in terms of staffing that would really help us to address that. And so we have listed for you, in terms of the materials beginning on the second page of the handout, the areas where we believe we need to be able to address that. The first of those is really moving to the concept of having a 1.0 FTE Director of Teaching and Learning, a cabinet level position, 52-week position, one with commensurate responsibility and authority with other cabinet level individuals. So at the same level as a Director of Finance, or a Director of HR and Technology, or a Director of Student Services, who would really be the person who would be the one who would focus our efforts in terms of RTI, would be responsible for the staff, who would be providing specific coaching to our buildings in terms of the RTI process, and would continue to do the quality work that we have come to expect in terms of curriculum and instruction. We have had the TOSA model in place now for the last decade. And while I think that was a quality model with the staffing that we had in place and the funding that we had in place, we really are in a position where we need to step to the next level. And so with the idea of doing this, we're looking at the elimination of the 1.5 FTE TOSA positions, and then the creation of the 1.0 FTE Director of Teaching and Learning. And I would just share with you, with all of these, we really thought about from the perspective of the district and the perspective of trying to maintain a strong financial position and a strong financial situation, of always thinking about, are there things that we can reduce or cut in terms of costs that will help us to offset the costs of what we're proposing. And so in this one, obviously, the elimination of 1.0 or 1.5 FTE TOSA positions and the implementation of the 1.0 OFTE helps us to offset the cost of that particular position. The second piece that we're looking at is the modification of the school psychologist positions, because we do not have school psychologists at each of our buildings that are full-time. The school psychologists come to us with a significant skill and training level in RTI, and especially in terms of assessment and in terms of behavioral interventions. And again, as we work with students and we look at the intervention process, we believe that the psychologist can help really support that particular process at each building level. And so our proposal there is to move from having less than full-time school psychologists in the buildings to having one full-time school psychologist in each building. The third piece we've talked about, and the piece that you heard this evening from our school social workers, is that we are proposing a modification in terms of the school social work positions. And we know that these positions are important to our kids. We know these positions are important in supporting the programs that we do. But we also know that in terms of the reality of how they are funded, realistically, we should not be looking at funding more than 0.5 or at the most 0.75 of those positions at any building through special education funding. Dr. Lewis has gone through the process of actually reviewing the time study data from buildings in terms of the work. We know that basically that's the kind of ratio that we need is approximately 0.5 of a FTE of social worker at each building. And the only reason I suggested 0.75 is that at Sibley Elementary, where we include also the district LI program and the district autism spectrum program, we think that we need to probably continue to provide more support in terms of special education funding for that than in the other buildings. At the same time, then, our belief is that we need to provide the opportunity, especially at the elementary level, to support students who are not in special education or not being referred to special education with supportive services that social workers can provide. And so as part of the proposal, we're actually suggesting the maintenance of the 1.0 FTE of social worker at each elementary, but the idea that 0.5 of that position comes from special ed, 0.5 comes from general ed. This allows us to really allow social workers to work with whatever kids they need to work with. It's also the situation that at the elementary level, there are no other supports, if you really think about it. There are no guidance counselors at the elementary. There used to be. That funding has gone away. There used to be the equivalent of assistant principals or deans of students at some of our elementary buildings. Again, the funding for that has gone away. And so what we know is that social workers are the ones that really provide the additional support to both special education students and to regular education students, but we really can't fund the efforts that they provide for regular education students with special education dollars. We need to be funding those through the general fund. At the secondary level, we have really tried to take a look at what we see as the difference at the secondary over the elementary. At the secondary level, basically, again, we're proposing a 0.5 FTE social worker being provided at the middle school and at the high school. But we are not proposing that we make up the difference between that and the current 1.0 at middle school and 0.8 at the high school with additional general fund dollars. And at this point, the discussions that I've had with both Jeff and Joel, and that's why they are here tonight along with Gary, is that we believe that there are other resources available to help support the students at the secondary level that just aren't available and will never be available at the elementary level. And that is, we have guidance counseling staff in each building. We have assistant principal staff in each building. And we know that in many cases, the first people that are on the scene, the first people that students at those levels go to when they have an issue may not be a social worker. It may in fact be the assistant principal. It may in fact be the guidance counselor. And so our sense was that we would like to at least propose the idea of working with just a 0.5 FTE for both middle school and high school because those other supports are available. Now, I know from the presentation we heard tonight, the concern is that we need to maintain that full-time FTE at the middle school and the 0.8 at the high school. And again, that's something that we're prepared to talk about and to respond to questions from the board. But at this point, our proposal is to actually reduce those two. Again, I think that the other discussion had to do with looking at the early childhood program and at the ALC program. And I know that there have been discussions that were ongoing and actually occurred significantly actually before we began even talking about these pieces, about the need to try to find dual support at Longfellow, not only for early childhood, but for the ALC. And I know that in fact, in a very gentle way, that our social worker at Longfellow has supported some of the ALC students in terms of need. So our thinking there would be, we potentially would look at maintaining the kind of FTE that we currently have at Longfellow, but rearranging where the support for that particular program would come from, with a portion of it coming out of special education where we can fund it appropriately, the other portion coming out of compensatory funding in terms of the ALC support, so that we can support students at the ALC even if they're not in special education, knowing that they have specific issues. So again, our proposal in terms of the social worker piece is, again, to maintain 1.0 FTEs at the elementary, with half-time funded by special ed, half-time by regular ed, and then at middle school and high school funding a half-time position at each building, and at the ALC early childhood program basically funding 0.4 positions, so that there would be not any reduction in terms of the FTE amount that's currently available to the Longfellow building, but focusing in terms of where the support would go. And then the next piece, and a piece that again, as we take a look at response to intervention and really beginning to put that in place and make it move forward, we believe that we need to put in place RTI intervention coaches, and basically looking at 2 of them in each building. Again, we would be looking at reducing our current literacy coaches and our current academic coaches, and that would make up one of the 2 for each building in terms of a reduction in cost for those pieces. But we'd be looking at 2 full-time intervention coaches, basically replacing the 1.0 FTE that currently is in place for literacy coach and academic coach. The focus really there is that we need to have individuals that are responsible directly to the Director of Teaching and Learning, whose focus is going to be to help each of our PLCs as they implement RTI at the elementary level. And that means coaching them in terms of how do you use the data, how do you go through a problem-solving process effectively, how do you choose an appropriate intervention that's scientifically based, how long do you do that, and how do you provide that treatment with integrity so that all the appropriate parts are being used, and then how do you evaluate it to know, did that do the job, or do we need to look at a different intervention or a different approach? We believe that if we're going to really see RTI implemented effectively, we have to have coaches there to support our staff every single day in terms of making that happen. And so, again, the approach there would be to support that with 2.0 FTE RTI intervention coaches at each elementary building. What we've also said is that it's not a life sentence. Obviously, when we build the skill within our PLCs to do the interventions appropriately, to do the problem-solving process appropriately, to actually implement the interventions and evaluate, and they do that automatically and routinely as a strategy each time that they work together and meet, then the concept would be we would be looking at that point probably at beginning to move the FTE for the interventions into the secondary, because again we're working with the idea of the secondary being a kind of a year behind the elementary in terms of the process, and so while RTI is being planned and thought through and designed for the secondary, it would be implemented and coached at the elementary level. In terms of those intervention coaches, those individuals would be at a TOSA level. They would be a teacher on special assignment, similar to what our literacy coaches and academic coaches are right now. And we would cast the net both inside the system for individuals that might have high skill levels, but we'd also cast the net outside the system to look at who else is out there that has that skill set, because we're seeing more and more individuals that have a skill set that includes training in RTI. We also know that we will need to provide additional support and training for those folks, and that'll be part of the process that we're moving forward with. The research data that we plugged in there is just the piece to help you remember that what's the difference between you get presented that information or demonstrated or even practice that. What is the ability for it to end up being applied in the classroom and implemented effectively. And the coaching piece and the data feedback piece really drive the difference between an implementation that may have a 5 to 60% success and an implementation that has a 95% success rate. So we know that the coaching piece is extremely important. And we know if we are committed to RTI, that has to happen. The last piece then is the piece around the technology support staff. And again, this is simply a piece to make sure that all of our current technology implementation is on track. Really looking at the fact that we are continuing to ramp up the amount of technology use that is in place for assessment and testing, and as we move into the potential of real technology transformation, the ability to make sure everything within that network is rock solid and the equipment is available to kids and to staff whenever they need it. And we don't ever have to say to a student, I'm sorry, you can't use the technology today because it's not working for us. And again, what we're proposing there is basically putting that 1.0 FTE technology support staff in place in addition to our current staffing to basically prepare us to look at the options and possibilities for one-to-one, but more appropriately to make sure that we can address all the needs that we currently have in terms of both wired and wireless technology and in terms of what has been a rapidly expanding requirements for assessment, where now we're looking at literally weeks and weeks in the year when labs and whatever need to be focused directly on providing assessment options. Now that we're doing assessments 2 and 3 times in various areas in order to do that, and we're going to see everything else that isn't in a technological format being in a technological format within the next year or so. So those are really the things we're talking about doing. Again, the balancing is balancing the idea that, yes, there are some additional positions that we're talking about implementing here. We're also looking at the reduction of other positions. We're also looking at trying to think about what's the most effective way to provide certain services and trying to make sure that especially as we work through those pieces, that we have put together a kind of a big picture plan that will address what we think are going to be the important components over the next several years. Again, this is a piece that's been reviewed multiple times by Cabinet. We have looked at these pieces and have kind of gone through them, but I also know that as you have had a chance to think about these pieces, you may have specific questions. And again, that's why I think every building principal as well as every Cabinet member is present tonight other than Hannah. And so, I think they would be very willing to respond to any specific questions you might have about any part of this proposal. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay. Well, Dr. Richardson clearly outlined the proposal that we've had some time to think about, and I guess in order for us to have any further discussion and questions, we really need to have a motion on the table, and the superintendent's recommendation is to approve the proposed changes as are outlined in front of us. Could I have a motion from someone? Is there a motion? Okay. So, does someone have a different motion to make?
I would move the motion that's being presented.
Pardon me?
I would move the motion to get it on the table so we can discuss it.
To discuss it? Okay. There is a motion to...
second.
Okay, and seconded by Carrie. Moved by Noel. Okay. Discussion. Noel, do you go first? No? Okay. John?
I do have a question. Dr. Richardson, you said that you think there are other tools in place to replace or other ways of providing the services that the social workers currently provide. Could you give us some detail and idea of how we're going to replace the services that they're currently providing?
Okay, and again, I'm going to ask Joel and Jeff to be involved with this particular discussion. The frame I would give it is that at the elementary level, there is no one else other than the building principal. And so if we're trying to support kids in need and trying to address their needs, we had one hand tied behind our back when we were trying to fund it totally through special ed. In fact, we were having to say to social workers, you really aren't supposed to be working with that student or that parent or that group of students because they are really not in special education. They're not in the process of being referred. They really are not supposed to be and cannot be funded through the special education process. That's why we've chosen to say we maintain the full-time position, half special ed, half regular ed. So basically, they're able to float back and forth and support kids in either realm, either regular ed students or special ed students. At the secondary level, I think the sense, and again, I'm going to ask that Joel and Jeff kind of respond to this, but the frame I would have is that when we think about how many of the needs of those kids are being met right now, it is not necessarily through the social worker right now. Many of the needs of those students that were articulated in their letter and in the information that they shared are being met by other members of the staff at the secondary level. Guidance counselors, assistant principals. And oftentimes they're the ones that get the student is coming to them to get that support and that help. So while I understand absolutely that the social workers can provide that kind of support at the secondary level, my sense is that the reality is they are providing it in some cases, and in other cases it's being provided by other individuals that are already in place and are already doing that on a regular basis. So I'm going to open it up and let you guys, if you would, kind of talk to that question.
John, maybe if I could just use an illustration of our student support team that meets every Thursday. as the support team reviews cases of individual students regarding whatever at-risk issue is on the table, there is a point in that conversation where essentially that student is up for grabs. And what I mean by that is that they say, who's going to follow up on this? Who's going to take care of this? Who's going to talk to the student? Who's going to talk to the teacher? Who's going to set up a communication with an outside entity? That process occurs within the body of what we have access to. So we have a school nurse, we have a police resource, we have a campus supervisor, we have 2 APs, three counselors, school psych, school social worker. I'm going to forget somebody, but it's a
Minority liaison.
Minority liaison, AmeriCorps, Promise Fellow, and of course the teaching staff and the educational assistants that know the students very well and have those relationships with them.
So if you use that kind of as an illustration of how, what resources we would have available to respond to student needs, it would be in that regard. We have a body of people, and the people we listed would be obviously the key components of that. But the SST, the way the SST functions is essentially kind of a